Hello, everybody, and welcome into another episode of Speaking Steagles, the premier Pennsylvania pro football podcast. I am Nick Vete, joined as always by Ricardo Martinez Paz. Probably not feeling as positive as he's felt in episodes past because unfortunately the Eagles lost in the Super Bowl to the Kansas City Chiefs. What a run it was. Comes up a couple points shy of being a Super Bowl victory. Maybe one bad call by the ref shy of being a Super Bowl victory. I don't know. We'll get into that. But Ricardo, I welcome you in, ask you how you're doing, man.
It's interesting you asked me that. It's been a little over a week now, and I've definitely accepted it. It's still, forever gonna sting. Losing such a good game that it was, and for the Eagles to have lost in that fashion. There was a lot of takeaways from that, a lot of positives. I'm sure a handful of negatives too, but um, I mean, in terms of Jalen Hurts, I feel great about him. I've never felt better about a quarterback. I haven't felt this good about a quarterback in a while, in a long time. I'd say maybe since Wentz's MVP. He should have been MVP before he got injured. Um, that season, that 2017 season, I haven't felt this good since then. So that says a lot. I mean, yeah, that's just to start off. Yeah, I'd say Hurts is definitely the future of this franchise.
I mean, it was such a great game. And I mean, like to have it end the way it did stinks, but like this is certainly a game that's going to be remembered for a long time as like really one of the best Super Bowls, at least in recent memory. I mean, it was back and forth the whole game, especially in that second half. I mean, just such an exciting game. And I know that it's going to be like one of those things where I'm going to look back on this game like the way that I kind of look back on like, like the Steelers Super Bowl victory against the Cardinals. Like you immediately think of like, oh, like James Harrison's
Yeah.
James Harrison's pick six or the Santonio Holmes catch or like even recent memory. Like I think back to the Buccaneers Chiefs. I think about just Patrick Mahomes getting hounded by the Buccaneers front seven. Like I'm gonna look back on this game and I'm gonna think of two things. I'm gonna think of that play call at the end that obviously we'll dive into. And another aspect that I think we're gonna have to talk about a little bit too is the fumble by Jalen Hurts in the first half because I think that was a big momentum shift from what could have been the Eagles kind of building some serious separation at that point. And even if they hadn't cashed in on that drive, just going up big versus obviously going into halftime with the score being closer and Kansas City still being within striking distance. So I have some takeaways. I have some thoughts on this game, but I'm going to kind of let you steer where we want to go with this first and kind of analyzing, I guess what the positives were, I guess we could say. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if you could really feel like positive when the end result ultimately was, losing the final game of the season. But I think we could just talk about kind of what went wrong for the Eagles a little bit, and maybe just some general positive takeaways where we're like, hey, this guy had a good game, or hey, like this was something they did really well. So
Yeah.
I'll let you kind of steer the conversation where we go first here.
So, yeah, I sort of was talking about it before. Jalen Hurts. I put this down. He played the game of his life, essentially. He was the best player on the field that Sunday night. The final stat line, absolutely unreal. 27 to 38. That's a 71.1 completion percentage, 304 passing yards, a one passing touchdown. That was the long one to AJ Brown. Um, 15 rushes, 70 yards, 3 rushing touchdowns. He broke all kinds of records that one. He tied the Super Bowl record for most rushing TDs by a single player, which was Terrell Davis in the Super Bowl 90s, I think it was. So that it's 100.3.4 rating. So in total, that was 374 yards, 35 points. I would say he played the perfect game apart from that fumble. That was obviously a huge momentum shift. But I'm going to just highlight some of these unreal plays. I'm not even going to there's some of them I've left out, but I feel like just about every play or every single snap, he was making some sort of ridiculous play. As I mentioned before, the 45-yard touchdown to AJ Brown to make it 14-7.
So that play was so electric, dude. I remember I was on the bus coming back from my ski race when that play unfolded. I had it on my phone, and like I think I was the only one on the bus watching at the time, and I was just like, "Oh my god, what a play!" And like everybody like huddled around to watch the replay. That play was insane.
I can't. Yeah, that throw was ridiculous. The adjustment by AJ
And
Brown.
I was gonna say AJ Brown needs some credit on that one too. But yeah, you're right. Just an electric play.
Then the next one I highlighted is the 4th and 5, the 28-yard run to set up a Jalen Hurts 4-yard rushing touchdown and make it 21-14.
Huge.
I mean, this was the drive that followed the fumble.
Yeah.
I mean, Jalen Hurts easily could have, been rattled, could have been like, a bit less, or like the offense could have been a bit less aggressive, but that's not how Sirianni works. Obviously, going on 4th and 5, it just, and for them to punch it in after, I mean, his response after that fumble was really telling. And once he scored that touchdown, I was like, you know what? I think if this turns into it, if this keeps going, if this game keeps, if the offenses keep scoring points, I think Jalen Hurts can keep up with Patrick Mahomes. I was confident in Jalen Hurts' ability in that game. The Chiefs just couldn't stop him. Then the near 35-yard completion to Devontae Smith that was overturned. I think this was right before the end of the half. That throw was absolutely unreal, but just man, the refs took a long time to review that one, but ultimately they ruled it incomplete. That throw was absolutely unreal. Then there's another ridiculous throw he made on. It was a false start, I think, that set him back to 3rd and 14, and then the 17-yard completion to Dallas Goedert. Yeah, it was 3rd and 14, and then extended their lead to 27-17 in the second half. Again, just unreal timing on that, unreal placement between two defenders. It's just he was on a different level. And then late in the game, when the Eagles were trailing 35-27, the 45-yard deep ball to Devontae Smith that led to him to Jalen Hurts scoring his 3rd rushing touchdown and then punching it in for 2 points. I mean, this dude literally carried this team on his back. I can't remember such, I probably the most dominant QB performance in a loss was the last one was Tom Brady against the Eagles, but this was absolutely unreal. He was just on another level, and he could have been MVP even though they lost. That's how good he was. He just was the best player on the field. I just on the biggest stage, it just his calmness, his poise. I mean, that's just what we've been seeing like the whole season, really, and it was just on display in the biggest game ever of his career. And man, I can't like it was really the defense that kind of let the Eagles down ultimately. But
let me get a point.
Not at fault for he's not the reason that the Eagles lost.
Absolutely, and I just one point that I have on Jalen Hurts. And I guess it's kind of a 2-part point here, but the fact that you brought it up, like he completely held his own with Patrick Mahomes. And like the fact that you were sitting there watching this game feeling confident that he could go toe to toe with him, I think tells you everything you need to know about how his performance played out. Because that was something we were talking about leading into this game was, could the Eagles hold up in a back and forth shootout? And I think the fact that he was able to hold pace, but then also at the same time, like, you had the confidence that the Chiefs weren't going to be able to stop him. And the only 2 times that I really distinctly remember the Chiefs stopping him in this game was 1, when with the fumble that led to the Nick Bolton touchdown, and 2, when they held him in the 4th quarter, they forced the Eagles to punt. It was like the 2nd time they punted in the whole game.
Yep.
And it led to the Kadarius Toney. He returned it all the way inside like the 5-yard line, which was brutal. I mean, outside of those 2, I mean, you take those away, Jalen Hurts did everything you could possibly imagine. I mean, the punt return isn't even his fault. I mean, who knows if yeah, I mean, like, who knows if they're able to hold Kadarius Toney to, a 5-yard return, if the Chiefs are even able to cash in on that drive. But just an incredible performance by Jalen Hurts. And one other thing I want to highlight, part of what's so damn impressive with him is the way that he carried himself in the post-game press conference too. The way that he answered saying, like, I don't remember exactly what he said because it's been like a week and a half now. But
I have the exact quote here.
dude, let it rip. Let it rip.
I'm gonna read this whole thing.
Read it.
So The question was, on losing the Super Bowl and what he learned from it. I think it was from a 16-year-old girl or something like that. It was something like someone really young who asked this question, and
Which
his
is even more
response
before
was,
you even read it, which is even more impressive. I didn't realize that, but like just to be such a leader and a good role model for younger kids, the younger generations, like to show like, hey, like even when you lose, like lose with class, lose with respect, and like still hold your shoulders up high. So go ahead and read it.
yeah. So I think you want to cherish these moments with the people that you've come so far with. Your family, your loved ones, your teammates, your peers, everyone that you do it with, and who you do it for, who do it for you. And I'll say I was proud of this team for everything that we've been able to overcome. Obviously, we had a big time goal in the end that we wanted to accomplish, and we came up short. I think the beautiful part about it is everyone experiences different pains, everyone's experience is different, but you decide if you want to learn from it. You decide if you want to use that to be a teachable moment. I know what I'm going to do.
How different is that, dude? This guy is such a leader. I'm getting just goosebumps, like because I'm about to bring up this comparison. But like when you think about, and we're gonna get into this conversation a little later. But you know what? I'm actually gonna save it. I'm gonna save it, but because it's gonna be more relevant later on. But I mean that just shows you everything you need to know about Jalen Hurts. Do you think he's gonna get paid this offseason? Do you think this offseason is when an extension gets done?
Yes, it has to be. It has to be done. I don't see any way around it. I mean, you just have to pay him. I mean, look at the development, like how much he's grown like throughout his career in the NFL. Every year he's gotten better, and this year, obviously, putting up pretty much an MVP, season. It just, because the injury didn't win it, but if he had stayed healthy, he would have won it. And the way he carries himself, his work ethic, like I love everything about this dude. Those are things you can't teach. Those are the things that have been ingrained in him, and he just carries himself so well. He's just such a professional, just like a human being is just great too. I love everything about this man. I'm sure the city of Philadelphia also does.
Yeah.
They've got to figure out a way to extend him. I don't care how much money it is as long as you extend him. Just give him the money. I
Yeah.
don't know
I
what
mean,
more he needs to show.
he had as good a performance as you're going to get from, as you said, from a quarterback in a losing effort in a Super Bowl. So certainly not his fault. But I mean, we do have to talk about some of these plays that were kind of the turning points of the game. And I guess we'll start with one of the ones I highlighted here. But I mean, the one blemish on Jalen Hurts in this game was that fumble in the second quarter that led to the Nick Bolton touchdown. And I mean, just to kind of remind everyone about the scene of what was taking place here, the Eagles were up. I believe they were up by one touchdown at this point, and
Yeah, it
they
was
were
14-7.
driving near the 50-yard line. And um, this was after Harrison Butker had missed a field goal. AJ Brown had just had that big 50-yard touchdown, and the Eagles had the chance to go up by 2 touchdowns at this point. And obviously, such a big momentum turn for the Chiefs to punch in the touchdown instead the other way with Nick Bolton recovering the football and getting into the end zone. So, I mean, that was just brutal, man. I think that was really. I mean, is it outlandish to say that the Eagles could have ran away with this game had that fumble not taken place? Because they were cruising in the first half.
They could have easily run away with it, but I'll say even before that play happened, they was 3rd and 1, and it was a false start. I think it was on Isaac Seumalo. And then that set him back to the 3rd and 6, and then the fumble happened. So, um, yeah, it was. I think the Eagles would have scored on that drive if it hadn't been for the fumble. But I don't know. Like I said, though, he bounced back from it. It certainly would have helped if they had gone up 21-7 instead of the game being tied 14-14. But those are just plays that happen.
I mean,
He just
even
lost the
if you
ball too.
even if you don't get a touchdown there and you settle for a field goal, or even if you have to punt, or it's a turnover on downs, like the fact, even if you fumble the ball and it doesn't go in for the touchdown, like the fact that it was the fact that it was really a 7-point swing the other direction. You could have gone into halftime, given how well the Eagles looked the following drive when they punched into the touchdown. You easily could have gone into halftime up 21-7, 24-7, and we could have been talking about an entirely different game. So
Yeah,
that play was just so huge in how this whole thing kind of unfolded, and how things momentum kind of changed at that point, and it certainly gave the Chiefs still some confidence into halftime, even though their offense had only put up 7 points. in the first half.
Yeah, and then at that point, halftime is 24-14. I'll just say this too: the Rihanna performance was awesome. That was sick.
Yeah, dude, I just rewatched it before we hopped on here because I had actually not watched it in full yet. I kind of watched it with one eye live, but like, dude, to me, like, I think that's a top 10 Super Bowl halftime show of all time. And I'm really critical of halftime shows.
Yeah, you are. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, no, it was. I have to. Yeah, initially I was like, okay, it was pretty good, and then I watched it again, and then I was like, all right, no, this is pretty damn good, especially when she revealed after, she was pregnant and stuff like that, and I was like,
Yeah.
oh wow, that's it was a lot of memes too about it, but no, it was really cool. It
All
was
right,
it was great.
in 30 seconds, rank these three halftime shows. Rihanna, last year they had it was Eminem, Snoop Dogg, that whole crew, and The Weeknd. Rank those three. Not it can even be your personal favorites. It doesn't have to be what you objectively think is the best.
Rihanna's the best. That's not even a question. um, uh, this is where I'm struggling because the weekend was trippy as hell. that
Yeah.
one, that one. I mean, I love the weekend, but I mean, I'm gonna pick him over last year's. But I don't know. The audio was kind of weird too in that. But
Yeah,
like
it was.
he
That was the
said
other
he
thing,
paid
dude.
for like,
Rihanna's voice really shined in this one
oh,
too.
it was her
You
voice.
know?
She's so good.
Yeah.
I mean, that's obviously first. That has to
Dude, and
be.
all the bangers that she had, like, it made me realize, like, damn, like, Rihanna's got a lot of good songs. Like, she didn't even sing that one song I always listen to in the shower, the one that goes like, "It's getting late, I'm making my
Oh,
way over to my favorite." You know
yeah.
what I'm saying? She didn't even sing that song. That's like when I think of Rihanna, I think of that song.
Oh man, no, like it
I'm
was
gonna
just so good.
take you away. Na, na,
Yeah,
na, na, na.
yeah,
Yeah,
I don't know the words, but I know it. Yeah, I'm
yeah. Dude, it
like,
always comes. I'm gonna listen to it in the shower. It's Thursday night. We're going out later. I'm gonna listen to it in the shower when I'm getting ready. I'm telling you, it gets me in the mood, dude. It
oh, it's she just has so many bangers. Like she
really
didn't miss
does.
at all. She never misses, and it's
Doesn't
crazy
miss.
that that was the first time in like 7 years she performed live. Like what?
Yeah,
I mean, that just made all the more iconic. But anyway, going back
absolutely. Anyway, yeah.
to the Eagles in the Super Bowl, I kind of want to touch on the second half defense, if
Yeah, go
that's
ahead.
okay with you.
Yeah.
So I mean, I remember sitting there at halftime, 10-point lead. I was like, okay, I feel fairly good, but I was also sitting there. I'm like, it's Patrick Mahomes. He's come back from these kinds of deficits before. You can never count Mahomes out, Mahomes and the Chiefs out. So I was like, all right, we'll see. And then the second half was just so ugly from from the Eagles defense. The Chiefs scored on all four second half drives. There was the first one with the 10-play, 75-yard drive, capped off by the Pacheco 1-yard rushing touchdown, made it 24-21. Then the Eagles added a field goal, 27-21. And then 9 plays and 71-yard drive capped off by Kadarius Toney touchdown. I mean, that was a wide open Kadarius Toney, mind you. Slay and Maddox both in man coverage. There miscommunication between them, and Toney was just walking into the end zone. So at that point, it was 28-27. And then the next one, 65-yard, obviously punt return, capped off by a Sky Moore 4-yard touchdown. Again, man coverage. Again, it was the corn dog play, as we know now. The same exact play on the other side of the field.
Yeah.
And Devontae Maddox, I mean, he was the one who was supposed to defend more, but he left him wide open, just took his eyes off him for some reason. And then it was 35-27. So,
Is it
um,
is it
yeah.
all the more frustrating for you the fact that the Eagles did kind of hold Travis Kelce in check in the second half, and it was really the Pachecos and the Tonys and the Jujus and the Sky Moores that really beat you? I mean, because the Eagles held Travis Kelce for the most part. I mean, he had one or two big catches in the second half, I remember, but most of his yards and obviously his one touchdown came in the first half. And it was really Juju, Pacheco, Tony, and then obviously Tony and Sky Moore had the two touchdowns. But Juju and Pacheco, it felt like were really carrying the load in the second half.
Yeah, I think the running game really got going in the second half, which is why the Eagles were struggling a bit more
Yeah.
defending the pass. I mean, that's sort of how Jonathan Gannon's defense is always. They're focused on not allowing the big plays, sort of conservative, kind of passive, and it's it was just on full display. Like I swear, it's always against the good QBs, always like those top tier quarterbacks where Gannon's defenses get shredded. Um, I mean, Herbert did it last year. Mahomes did it last year. Dak Prescott against or this in the second regular season game they had. I mean, the defense got shredded again. Um, it's just I mean, the other thing that didn't help was the fact that the Eagles didn't get a single sack on Mahomes. You can blame the grass or whatever the field for that. I'm not going to. It's just they couldn't get any pressure. And Mahomes was also escaping out of the pocket. Like, I mean, we know he can do that, but the fact that he was like running, even after he went down the first half, it looked like he re-hurt himself on the ankle injury. And
Yeah.
TJ Edwards dragged him down. Mahomes was still running after, and like they just let him loose.
I mean,
There
yeah,
was
he had that big run on the Chiefs' final drive too for
yep,
like 20 yards or something like that.
yeah,
And I mean,
26 yards.
the turf was inexcusable, but what's even more inexcusable is the fact that, this Eagles team has relied all season on getting pressure on the quarterback, and they didn't get a single sack in this game. I mean, I was dead wrong in thinking Hassan Reddick would be the Super Bowl MVP, which was my prediction. But
Yeah,
I mean, that's got to be where a lot of the blame lies too. And then you talk about how much success the Chiefs had running the ball in the second half. I mean, if you can't stop the run and you can't get pressure on the quarterback, then you're really going to set yourself up for a long day. And that's
yeah,
exactly what happened in the second half.
yeah. I mean, in total was 158 rushing yards, 26 carries. That's 6.1 yards per carry. That's terrible. That's not good. I mean, yeah, the Eagles' defense is on their heels the whole game, or sorry, the whole second half. So it's just, I also sitting there. I was like, once the Chiefs scored on the first drive, I was like, okay, this is going to be a problem for the rest of the half, and of course it was. I had no faith. I said this even before the game. I was like, if anything, it's going to be the defense that it's going to be the defense is as the reason as to why the Eagles would lose. But I was more confident in the offense. Mahomes is a different
Yeah.
kind of player. It's just he's one of a kind, and just
And I mean, credit
again.
has to go to that Chiefs offensive line too
Oh yeah,
to
yeah,
hold the D line in check. I mean, I even heard Orlando Brown Jr. On the Pat McAfee show, and he was talking about how like they were saying that the Philly front seven was going to get all over us, and we didn't allow a single sack. So he was amped up, and was certainly on that Chiefs O line going into the game. Like, hey, everybody's doubting us on this one. They certainly played with the chip on their shoulder.
yeah. They definitely did. It was just ugly that second half. That was the Eagles' downfall, really. So,
Yeah.
but
Um,
it's yeah.
I think the next thing we have to talk about is this call by the refs on the Chiefs' final drive. It was a 3rd and 8, I believe, in the red zone, and James Bradbury was called for the holding penalty on Juju Smith-Schuster that ultimately resulted in a first down, and the Chiefs were able to milk the clock and kick the game-winning field goal. So, what's your initial reaction to this? Just raw. What's your take on it?
I know in the moment I was very like I didn't really show it, but I was clearly upset.
Yeah.
um, it especially because for the Super Bowl to have been it was 35-35 at that point for the game to have been essentially decided on a penalty. I thought was just
Such
terrible.
a good game on a penalty, man. That's how it's
Yeah,
settled.
it's just of all ways to lose, it's on like on a penalty, on a holding call. Which, I mean, looking at it now, yeah, he grabbed his jersey. I'm not gonna say he didn't. I mean, James Bradbury even said after the game he held him. But it just that was the only holding call in the game, I think, defensively.
It was, and I mean, it's like there was a questionable call. There was a questionable no call in, I believe, the first quarter. Similar situation where Juju was the receiver, didn't get the call on what would have been a potential first down conversion. So I mean, it just wasn't being called all game, which is what's most frustrating. And I always say this about the refs: fans buy tickets to watch the players play. Fans turn on the TV to watch the players play. People watch football to see the players play. Nobody watches football to see the refs throw flags and decide games, especially when it's such a questionable call like that, where, yeah, maybe he held him, but you weren't calling it all game. That's how you're going to decide the Super Bowl. And I think the fact it's not getting talked about enough, that ball was kind of uncatchable. I mean, it was still a good
Yeah.
it was still a good 5-8 yards past where Juju would have been. He would have had to made a toe tapping catch on the outside boundary there. Um, I don't know. That's one to me that is really upsetting. And I think when I look back on this game, I'm gonna remember, I said it at the top. I'm gonna remember that Nick Bolton, the Jalen Hurts fumble that led to the Nick Bolton touchdown. I'm gonna remember that call because it was huge and it really did. It was the swinging point in the game for sure.
Yeah, and the other thing about that, I think it was the back judge that threw it, the one in the end zone who threw
And it
that
was
flag. I don't
late,
know,
dude.
like how'd you see that? Like
It
you're
was
all the way
such
back
a late
there.
call, man. It was so late.
Well, yeah, once I saw like there was a flag and Mahomes was pointing, I was like, yeah, this game's over. I
Dude,
just
it was such a late call. The other thing too, I went back and watched the highlights today to refresh my brain on the game. Dude, Juju's reaction to that play, he acted like, oh man, like we didn't get it, He was not
yeah,
calling for a flag. He wasn't, berating the refs or anything. He literally just walked off like it was any other incompletion. And then the flag gets thrown. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it's frustrating. It's frustrating to see the game decided like that.
Yeah, I mean, now I've obviously accepted that we moved on, but in the moment, it was just absolutely horrible. I thought it was an egregious call, but that's just how the game goes. Sometimes refs sometimes just make questionable calls. I don't know. But I think Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts both said it well after the game. Like they're just doing their job. It's like we're not the ones throwing the flags on the field. We got to do our job better to not put ourselves in that situation. So you could say all you want about the refs, but ultimately it was the defense that didn't hold and put them in that situation anyway. So
Yeah, it's a good way to look at it. Do you have any other notes on this game that you want to bring up before we kind of transition to the next phase of the episode?
uh no, it was just now it feels nice to talk about it in full about this loss.
Yeah.
It's still I mean it's gonna hurt for a while. But it's still
Well, I'm
um
gonna make it hurt a little more real quick because I just have to read this when I was just like
oh
looking through
yeah,
the
yeah,
stats and
please.
everything. I mean, statistically speaking, the Eagles as a team led in first downs, third and fourth down efficiency, total play, total drives, pass yards, total yards, and time of possession. I mean,
Yeah.
the Eagles played really well in this game offensively, man, and it was just the
Yep.
defense, the one costly turnover, and I guess to a lesser extent than the other two, the holding call that really cost them, man. But they could have just as easily won the game, and unfortunately they came up short. You still got me?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
and there's another. Yeah, yeah. But there was this stat I can't remember. Um, it was something about the Super Bowl, just like teams that are leading at the half. Or I think it's like I can't remember. It was like 26-1 or something like that. And then of course when I saw that, I was like, I don't like that. I didn't like that. So it was like almost like a sign.
Oh
um,
man.
but yeah, yeah,
Well,
man. It's yeah. We can
that
we can move on to the next part if you want.
yeah. That being said, I mean here's a fun conversation that we can spend a little time on here. So I saw CBS Sports post this, and um, I sent this post to you. I feel like we've texted about it briefly, but nothing in depth. But let's talk about it a little bit. I'm curious about your thoughts about this. But the last 17 quarterbacks to lose their Super Bowl debut haven't made it back. That includes the likes of Drew Bledsoe, Steve McNair, Kerry Collins, Donovan McNabb, Rex Grossman, Colin Kaepernick, Cam Newton, Matt Ryan, Jared Goff, Jimmy Garoppolo, Joe Burrow, and now Jalen Hurts is the next quarterback to lose his Super Bowl debut. Um, so the question I have when I saw this, that there's some random names on here that aren't really worth mentioning, but the two that kind of stood out to me because they have similar play styles and also kind of had similar rises in their career early on are Donovan McNabb, Cam Newton, and Joe Burrow as comparing them to Jalen Hurts. Now, everybody and their mom seems to think that Joe Burrow is going to be the next great quarterback in the NFL, and I don't really have an argument against that.
Yeah.
Um, so a lot of people think Joe Burrow is going to get a Super Bowl at one point, or at least make it back to one, and I think that's a pretty fair assessment.
Yeah.
Um, Cam Newton and Donovan McNabb are the two interesting ones because they both had a very similar rise in their career. Cam Newton obviously getting an MVP, making it to a Super Bowl, never made it back. Donovan McNabb, I think, finished second in MVP voting his second year in the league. And then in 2005, a couple years later, made it to the Super Bowl, never made it back. Jalen Hurts now up for a contract, made it to a Super Bowl in his third season. So my question for you, is Jalen Hurts more in the category of Joe Burrow, where we think we're really confident he's going to get back, maybe get a Super Bowl, or is he more in the category of Donovan McNabb, Cam Newton? It could go downhill at this point.
Yeah. I mean, I think he falls more aligned with Joe Burrow. I just think as a passer, Jalen Hurts is probably better than Cam Newton and Donovan McNabb. I mean, they were both pretty good, but I just think with with Jalen Hurts' trajectory, and I mean, I'm fairly confident he can maintain this play, even if they have a different offensive coordinator. I don't know his work ethic. I mean, him and Joe Burrow in terms of personalities, I feel like are similar in terms of. I mean, they're both very cool, very calm, collected. They carry. I mean, the way they carry themselves is tremendous. Their, I mean, their work ethic. They're just the way they approach the game. Their love for the game. I feel like is really, really like telling. It's really obvious compared to Cam Newton, and like they're very serious about it. As opposed to like Cam Newton, who's like, not that there's anything wrong with him having fun and stuff like that, but I feel like it just wasn't as evident with him being, like really growing, especially after that Super Bowl loss. And man, it's I believe that Jalen Hurts can get back to another Super Bowl, especially with the weapons he has around him for the next few years. I mean, the core of that offense is intact for the next 2 years. The only one who is not going to, or might not come back is Isaac Seumalo, their right guard. Other than that, everyone else has at least another year, or and assuming no one retires like Jason Kelsey or Lane Johnson. So this team is still very much built to win.
And at the very least, put up points. I mean, there's also a
Yeah.
chance Miles Sanders doesn't come back too, but
Yeah, that's true. We'll get into that too. But I until I see something that says otherwise, I think Jalen Hurts is going to get back to one eventually. It's just his work ethic, man. I've never seen anyone work as hard as him.
Here's an interesting comparison here. 2015, Cam Newton wins the MVP award. He has 3,800 passing yards, 35 touchdowns, and he had 636 rushing yards on 10 rushing touchdowns, 45 touchdowns total. Jalen Hurts this year, runner-up in the MVP award, 3,700 passing yards, 22 passing TDs, 760 rushing yards, and 13 rushing touchdowns. So more rushing touchdowns, more rushing yards, not as many passing touchdowns or passing yards as Cam Newton had in that MVP season. I think the bigger thing than these guys kind of having similar stats and maybe comparing Jalen Hurts' work ethic is just what Howie Roseman honestly does to continue to build a roster around Jalen Hurts. Because, the thing that would be more concerning for me as compared to Joe Burrow is the fact that Jalen Hurts relies a lot on his legs, and so did Cam Newton. So there's always that added risk of the health factor. When you look past that, then I think it really just becomes like, can Howie Roseman continue to keep this roster at a Super Bowl caliber? Because things quickly went into shambles the years after Cam Newton's MVP season. Some of it was to blame on him and maybe his lack of staying in the staying in kind of the upper echelon that he had gotten to. But that roster kind of started to fall apart a little bit too, and obviously he needed. He wanted to get paid. He got a contract extension, and I think that obviously hurts the ability to continue to build a roster, and things quickly deteriorated over time. And I think it's also a factor that Ron Rivera was a defensive head coach and Cam Newton had to kind of deal with that versus Nick Sirianni, who is an offensive mind coaching Jalen Hurts. The other factor that I think is kind of the biggest differentiator, and I started to bring up this point earlier, but again, look at the post-game press conferences from Jalen Hurts' Super Bowl and Cam Newton's Super Bowl, how they both reacted to losing. Cam Newton, remember, he was pouting, wasn't answering questions, being very short with reporters, versus Jalen Hurts, who, had the time to answer all the questions, had a very good outlook on how he's going to kind of take this loss, learn from it, and come back better. So, I'm kind of in the mindset too that I think this guy is going to be one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL for a good chunk of the future here. I don't want to go ahead and say the next 10, 15 years, but I'd be willing to say the next 5 to 10 years. Like, yeah, this guy still has a Super Bowl window in him, and a Super Bowl run in him as long as Howie Roseman can keep the roster intact and Jalen Hurts can stay healthy.
Yeah. It's yeah. I mean that's very very telling. The differences in the post Super Bowl press conference. Like I said, I mean Jalen
And I
Hurts
think
is
that's where the
shown.
work ethic comes in that you're talking about. I mean, you just see it in simply how these guys act and how these guys talk.
Yeah, and see when Jalen Hurts says that, I truly believe that. I know, it's just he's shown that his entire career. He's just been such a professional for I mean, we even go back to his college days. He got benched in the national championship game, and he was instead of whining about it or pouting and stuff like that, he showed support for Tua.
It's a great point. That's a great point.
Like, I in terms of work ethic and like all of that. I just believe in him. And yeah, it's just
The guy's got great character.
he really does. Yeah, you don't. I mean, I feel like it's it's hard to see that especially after such a you played arguably the best game of your career and you still lost. Um, it was. I mean, it was also just the raw emotion he showed. I mean, you could tell he was feeling it. And I mean, I love the guy so much. It just I believe the Eagles will be back. One way or the other. So
This is something. I mean, I don't think I'm going to forget about this conversation. This is something we're going to look back on when we're 10 years down the road and Jalen Hurts is kind of on the twilight of his career. I'm going to be like, dude, like you were either so right about Jalen Hurts getting back, or we can look back and be like, man, like can't believe he never got one more run in him. And it'll be interesting to look back and remember that. But
oh yeah, for sure.
all right, we're about 40 minutes in here. Let's change direction a little bit. We've got some head coaching, not head coaching, excuse me, some coaching staff updates right after the Super Bowl ended. Shane Steichen, Jonathan Gannon, see you later. They're out the door. Steichen going to Indianapolis, Gannon going to Arizona. What are your thoughts on this? And obviously there's been some other shakeups on the Eagles coaching staff as well.
Definitely big losses. I think more so Shane Steichen than Jonathan
100%
Gannon. It's tough to see that. I'm not surprised it happened. It was just, I mean, you look at the offense as a whole, they were third in points per game, second overall offense in the league. It just, I mean, he was the play caller of the team too, so he was calling the shots and everything.
I think
So
that's something people don't really remember is the fact that he was calling the plays. It wasn't Sirianni.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, yeah, that one hurts. But I wish him all the best of luck in Indianapolis. He did wonders with Jalen Hurts. I would expect probably Brian Johnson, the quarterbacks coach, to be promoted. There hasn't really been much in terms of offensive coordinator searches outside of the organization. So I think they're just going to promote from within. In terms of Jonathan Gannon,
This one's interesting. Well, hang on, real quick on Shane Steichen. I just want to say,
yeah,
yeah, I mean, he I think was so vital to what the Eagles did this year that is such a huge role and such huge shoes that are going to have to get filled. I don't know whether Sirianni's going to take the play calling duties back over next season. Obviously that's still TBD. But I mean, he deserves a lot of credit for getting the most out of this Eagles offense and getting a lot out of Jalen Hurts, and I mean certainly going to be a big gap to fill. And then kind of as you were starting to say there, Jonathan Gannon is the next one. But I want to pose the question to you as this way: he's gone. Is it really that big of a deal that he's gone? Like, I want to know how much credit you think he really deserves for how well this defense played this season versus the actual guys on the field getting it done. Gannon's always been a little bit more of a conservative play caller, and now he goes to Arizona. And from what I've read, he's not even going to be the defensive play caller in Arizona. So, your thoughts?
Ooh, well, I see the stats will tell you one thing: first in sacks, first in pass defense, middle of the pack against the run. I just sort of like you said though, a bit conservative with his play calling. And it's especially noteworthy against, like I said before, better QBs. You know, there's those quarterbacks that are in probably the top 12 category, we'll say. And I think, I mean, he had all the talent in the league, like to Hassan Reddick, James Bradbury. They just so many playmakers on defense. I don't. I think. Oh man, how do I word this? Like, I don't think this one hurts as much
Yeah.
as losing Shane Steichen
The
does.
the shoes aren't as big that have to be filled, so to speak, as
Yeah,
the offensive coordinator. Like
yeah,
Steichen left a big void.
definitely.
Gannon, Gannon, I think you can find a replacement for him, and I think you may even I don't want to discredit it too much, but like I'm curious how this Eagles defense would have played had they run really a ton of man coverage and really just hammered pressure all the time, which wasn't really what Jonathan Gannon wanted to do at the end of the day.
No, he was never really a pressure kind of guy anyway.
Yeah,
A lot of trust in the front four, the front five to get to the quarterback. And against, inferior offensive lines, that was, I mean, easy for them. I mean, if
yeah.
they played a lot of not so good offensive lines and not so good QBs. So I think the stats, might have been a bit, maybe a bit inflated. But they're going to be going up against tougher opposition next year, and I feel like Gannon wouldn't have done as well next year if he had still been the defensive coordinator. But it's one of those things that
It,
happen.
it's tough. It's tough to lose both coordinators in the same off season,
Yeah,
but like I think they'll be able to find somebody who can step up and replace Gannon. Steichen's a tough loss. It'd
yeah,
certainly be easier if you. It's just tough because I don't want to say it'd be easier if you just had to replace Steichen, but like there is a world out there where they find someone who does a better job coaching this defense than Jonathan Gannon. Like that's
yeah,
not out of the realm of possibilities.
yeah. And I mean, I'll sort of go into the defensive coordinator search. It's definitely going to be from outside, from the and who was in the running? Vance Joseph was in the running there, but he just got hired by the Broncos and to
Yep.
join Sean Payton's staff. There are a few other names. Bengals defensive assistant Sean Desai, I believe is how you say his name. Um, they interviewed former Wisconsin defensive coordinator Jim Leonard, Rams defensive back coach Chris Shula, not very inspiring really, and Michigan's Jesse Minter. So, um, yeah, I mean, Vance Joseph would have been ideal, because considering he has the most experience in the NFL out of all
But
of
again,
those
but again,
names.
it is. I feel like part of it with Vance Joseph too is it's a name. It's a name that we recognize. At the
Yeah,
same time, I mean, like I wasn't super familiar with Shane Steichen before, like
right,
midway
right.
through last season, if that. So,
Yeah, yeah, that's
and
fair.
look at how well he's performed. So again, I think a lot of it has to come down to the philosophy, the scheme, and how well they just fit with what Sirianni and the Eagles want to do.
Yeah, that is true. That's a good point. And at some point, I feel like the Eagles gotta hire someone in the next 2 weeks before free agency starts. That period.
Yeah, get your staff kind of figured out before you start worrying
Yeah,
about players. Yeah.
yeah. Because then that's a whole other issue to worry about. But in any case, that's how it goes. That's how it's been for the Eagles the last since the Super Bowl, really.
Yeah. And on the Steelers front, as far as coaching goes, I mean, or do you want to close up and wrap? Because there was a couple other Eagles coaches that left as well, weren't there?
Yes. I just don't have their names off the top of my
Yeah,
head, but
no worries. It was smaller positional coaches, so not
yeah,
as big of
yeah.
losses. But I know the Steelers had two other positional coaches that left as well. Um, I don't know if I wrote down who it was. Oh, it was John Mitchell and Blaine Stewart. But again, neither of them were actually positional coaches, so to speak. They just kind of worked with, certain position groups, but they weren't like the head position coach of that group. So it's nothing crazy. One of them went to the college ranks, and I don't know where. Oh, John Mitchell retired. That's right.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
the one other loss was Brian Flores, which wasn't really a surprise. I mean, I think the expectation was always that it would be kind of like a shorter term thing. Maybe you'd get 2 seasons out of him, but he was getting head coaching interviews. He was getting head coaching interviews. I know he interviewed with Arizona, and then ultimately to land the defensive coordinator position with the Vikings. That's a fit I actually really like alongside second year head coach O'Connell. Um,
Yeah.
so I like that fit up there in Minnesota, and good for him, man. He's after getting fired from that Dolphins job, it was definitely questionable there for a little bit. And the Steelers got a year out of him. He helped out with the linebackers a lot. I think he got a lot out of Robert Spillane. I feel like he was the player that at that linebacker position the Steelers kind of saw take the biggest jump.
Mhm.
Devin Bush had a pretty solid season. Nothing crazy, not enough for I think the Steelers to bring him back, but still solid. Miles Jack had a really solid under the radar year. So Brian Flores kind of got his name back out there, like, hey, I can still coach. And I'm glad he's getting an opportunity now with a pretty big role up in Minnesota. And it wouldn't shock me if in a few years he's a head coach in the NFL again.
Yeah. I mean, he was. I mean, defensive minded, just a really good coach. And then that whole ordeal with the Dolphins was that was a lot. That was a whole different set of circumstances. But I'm glad he's.
Which is still an ongoing case as far as I'm aware.
Is it?
I don't think anything's been settled with it, has it?
Oh no, I don't think so. Actually, now that
Because
you say
weren't
it,
the stuff that the Dolphins lost their draft pick with, I thought was for something different.
it was because they were what was it, tampering? I think with Tom Brady,
Yeah,
and
you're right, and it was more
and
geared towards
Sean
the owner.
Payton, I believe. Yeah, yeah. So that's why they lost their
Yeah,
first round.
pertaining to the
Yeah, you're
integrity
right.
of the game, 100%. So I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure that Brian Flores stuff is still going on. He's obviously not front and center with the legal aspects of it, but still,
Yeah,
I,
yeah,
I don't I don't think that's been settled. We would have heard about it.
yeah. That's true. But he deserves a chance as a defensive coordinator.
Oh,
Maybe one day we'll get
100%.
another.
Even if he wins the case, I think he still deserves a shot as a head coach down the line.
Oh yeah, yeah. I agree. I agree with that.
Yeah.
But
And I
yeah,
think you could even call it. I mean, this is kind of getting a little bit. We're diving a little deep here now, but it's questionable whether he should have even been fired in the first place. You know,
yeah, yeah,
nothing against the Dolphins. Obviously, wanted to go in a different direction offensively, but to me, Flores is definitely a guy that absolutely deserves to be a coordinator in this league, and I think he will as long as he has success in Minnesota. Which I want to say, yeah, I think he will because I believe he's a good coach. He'll be a head coach again in this league.
yeah, yeah. I don't really have much more to add on that.
I
But
don't either. And the last bit of news I want to talk about, and this just came up today. We're gonna have a big free agency episode. That'll probably be our episode next week. Is breaking down the free agents that both the Eagles, who have a ton of free agents actually,
oh
and the
yeah,
Steelers as well, talking about who we really want to see back in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, and who is maybe going to be too expensive or not worth keeping around. So we'll get to that next week. But one name on Pittsburgh who was a free agent and was in the news today was Mason Rudolph, and he was saying that he let me get the exact wording here. Mason Rudolph said that he wouldn't quote close the door unnecessarily on continuing his career with the Pittsburgh Steelers. So maybe Mason Rudolph comes back. I don't know. I'm not opposed to it because you need someone to back up Kenny Pickett. And if you
yeah,
cut if you cut Mitchell Trubisky, as good of a guy as he seems to be, and as good as he carried himself in the locker room after getting benched, I mean, you free up $10.5 million in cap space by cutting him, which I think is the smart move. If he wants to come back, bring him back on a lesser deal, but $10.5 million is too much for a backup quarterback. That's really not. I don't even think he's really going to be mentoring, Mitch Trubisky. So I think that mentoring Kenny Pickett. So I think he's a guy that's a cap casualty. And if they decide Mason Rudolph is the guy that we want to bring back to be the backup quarterback, he's familiar with the system. He's been here for a number of years. I think Pittsburgh had faith in him last year. Should his number be called? I mean, I think that's part of the reason that they didn't trade him at the deadline and get some sort of pick for him was because they were like, hey, if a doomsday scenario comes, we've got faith in Mason Rudolph to maybe keep this ship going. So I wouldn't really be opposed to it, you know?
Okay. So I mean, yeah, I mean, I feel like that would be. It all makes sense if they were to cut Trubisky. Yeah, like you said, cap casualty, too much money.
I don't think there's any world where it makes sense to keep Trubisky. All right,
No, I don't think so. No, you need that money, like like any money, like, especially when it's a cap hit like that. Like, there's no need to keep a backup quarterback. You're just going to be holding a clipboard on the sideline, but you can get someone, you can get a veteran for less too. So
exactly, I'm not looking for the backup quarterback to be making more than like $3-4 million a season. You know, that's like the max I'd be like comfortable with the backup quarterback making, because Kenny Pickett's the guy. You know, and this roster still needs work. I do believe that this Pittsburgh Steelers team is going to be a playoff team next season. I've already said that. But, to get to the level of being a Super Bowl contender, it still needs some work. So I don't need a top-tier backup quarterback next season when, obviously championship aspirations are still maybe 2 years away.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, 2 years down the line, maybe you reconsider that sort of logic. But right now, I don't think you really need to.
And I think Mason Rudolph needs to look himself in the mirror and say, hey, like unless he's getting blown away by a team saying, hey, we'll give you, $6-7 million to come be our backup quarterback, because I don't think he's getting a starting job this offseason. So unless he's getting that to really just make some money, I think he's got to look himself in the mirror and say, hey, like my spot right now in the NFL is as a backup quarterback. And if Pittsburgh, a system I'm comfortable with, and I'm one injury by Kenny Pickett away from getting a shot starting in the NFL again on a system and a team that I'm comfortable with, I think he's got to look himself in the mirror and say, hey, maybe that is his best situation.
Yeah, maybe he should do it. But we'll see if, that does happen. Yeah, I guess that would be the ideal situation if you were to cut Trubisky and bring Rudolph back. I feel like that would be pretty good deal, honestly. But
yeah,
who knows?
Wouldn't be a bad situation. It's still a lot to unfold, but just some minor news and interesting because I think a lot of people, both Pittsburgh fans and just, around the franchise, maybe thought that Mason Rudolph was for sure not coming back, but seems like he's not completely opposed to it. Could also be him just, trying to keep relations fine and, look fine in the media, but time will tell. Ricardo, you have any final thoughts here before we close things out on this episode?
Ooh. I'm going to say it anyway. Fly, Eagles, fly.
Fly, Eagles, fly, man. All right, we will be back next week, and, man, we're going to be diving into the offseason. So we'll be talking about the free agents on both of these teams, who we need to see back in Pittsburgh, back in Philadelphia for next season. Until then, everybody, have a good night, have a good weekend. Bye-bye now.